The envelope was heavy, the kind that carried more than paper. It was ivory embossed with gold lettering that shimmered against the morning light, smelling faintly of expensive leather and old success. My brother's favorite scent. The handwriting was perfect. The message short: Leon Castillo and Sienna Hart invite you to celebrate their success. I stared at it for a long moment, my coffee cooling beside me, the edges of the invitation pressing against my fingers like a quiet dare. Leon was finally getting everything he'd ever wanted: recognition, applause, legacy. And he'd made sure I would know it. It was the first time I'd heard from him in 3 years. The last time we spoke, I was still rebuilding my studio after the fire he didn't even bother to call about. He'd smiled that perfect rehearsed smile and said, "Maybe this is your sign to find something real, Amara. Fashion isn't a career, it's a phase." He had no idea that the phase he mocked was now worth more than the company sponsoring his party. No one did. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The invitation said, "The Grand L'Ombre Hotel, downtown Los Angeles." Of course it did. Leon never settled for anything less than spectacle. A success party, he called it. Not a product launch, not a family gathering. Success, capital S, like he'd trademarked the word. I could almost hear his voice through the script, self-assured, showy, the golden child rehearsing his own legend. I placed the invitation down and laughed softly, the sound sharp against the quiet of my apartment. My walls were lined with sketches, bolts of silk, and sample patterns from the next collection under my brand, AM Atelier. The world didn't know who owned it. To them it was just a mysterious couture house run by someone named E. Amari, my pseudonym, my protection. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who once told me I'd never make a living sewing was now wearing a brand I secretly designed. Marcus, my operations director, and the only person who knew the truth, leaned against the doorway holding his coffee mug like a prop in a scene he'd already memorized. "You going to frame that or burn it?" "Neither," I said, sliding the envelope back into its sleeve. "I'm going." He raised an eyebrow. "To that circus family events," I said, "are always educational." "Educational or strategic, both." He studied me for a beat. "They won't recognize you." I smiled faintly. "They never do." When I first started AM Atelier, I'd promised myself anonymity until the brand spoke louder than my name ever could. Now it has. The last quarterly report had tripled our valuation. Our designs had closed Paris Fashion Week, our name whispered in every editor's inbox, our waiting list stretching months ahead. And still I hadn't put my face to it. Leon had spent his life chasing spotlights. I'd learned to control the ones that others begged for. I looked down again at the invitation, at the shimmering gold letters spelling out his name. Leon Castillo, my brother, my mirror once, my rival always. I remembered the day he got his first big contract, how my parents opened champagne, how my mother said, "Leon, you were born for this." She turned to me afterward, smiled gently, and added, "You're the creative one, honey. You'll find your little path." Her words had sounded kind, but they'd built the wall between us that still stood. Now, years later, I was the invisible one with power they couldn't see. And maybe, just maybe, that was my revenge. That night I stood by the window, overlooking the city. The skyline flickered like sequins stitched onto black fabric, imperfect but beautiful in its persistence. I took a sip of cold coffee and whispered, "Let's give them a show." The Grand L'Ombre Hotel gleamed like a diamond under chandeliers too large to be real. The marble floors reflected every face twice, forcing people to look at themselves as they judged everyone else. I walked through the lobby quietly, my heels barely making a sound. I'd chosen simplicity on purpose, a long black dress, no jewelry, except for a thin silver bracelet, my grandmother's. My grandmother Vivian had taught me to sew when I was 10. She used to say, "Stitches are stories, Amara. Sew them straight even when your hands shake." Back then I didn't understand what she meant. Now I did. The hostess stopped me at the entrance. "Name, please, Amara Castillo," I said. Her eyes flickered in recognition. "Ah, family of the host." I nodded once. Her smile stiffened the way people do when they realize you belong to the family they've been gossiping about. "This way, Miss Castillo." As I stepped inside, the noise hit me. Laughter crystal. Clinking, the dull thrum of jazz that sounded expensive but emotionless. People in designer suits floated across the room like mirrors of vanity. Cameras flashed as Leon posed near the stage, perfect as ever, his fiancée Sienna glued to his arm. He spotted me almost instantly. Of course he did. He always needed an audience. "Well, well," he said into the mic, his grin wide. "Look who decided to show up, my little sister, still keeping things minimalist." "I see." Laughter rippled through the room, polite and poisonous. I smiled steady. Consistency is underrated. It's how legacies are built. He blinked, caught between confusion and pride, unsure whether he'd been praised or challenged. I didn't care. Sienna leaned closer to him, whispering something that made him smirk. They looked like a magazine cover, curated hollow, gleaming. I drifted to the bar, ignoring the glances. One of the waiters poured me champagne, his voice low. "Big night for your brother, huh?" "Apparently." "Must be proud." "I am," I said, sipping. "Pride just looks different on me." Across the room, Leon was bragging to a cluster of investors about his new modeling contract with Ciela, one of Europe's largest luxury houses. He didn't know that 48 hours earlier I'd signed the papers that made AM Atelier the majority shareholder of that very brand. Marcus had texted me before I left my apartment, deal closed. "Ciela is ours. Contract renewals will end next quarter." I hadn't replied, but my fingers had itched for this moment, not to ruin him, but to remind him that silence isn't weakness. It's a strategy. The band switched to a slower tune. The crowd shimmered under golden light. Sienna's laughter chimed like glass. Leon raised his glass and shouted, "To success, and to those who couldn't handle it." Some people cheered. I didn't. I set my champagne down and whispered, "To those who built it quietly." It wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was clear. The kind that comes when you realize your power doesn't need to be announced to be undeniable. When I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Calm, elegant, untouchable. The girl who once cried over ruined fabric was gone. The woman standing there now knew that revenge wasn't always about destruction. Sometimes it was about revelation. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the scent of gardenias and expensive regret. I took out my phone, opened my message app, and typed to Marcus, "Prepare the reveal plan," quietly. His reply came within seconds, understood. "Operation begins after the party." I smiled faintly. As the hotel lights glowed behind me, I thought about my grandmother's words again, how stitches are stories. This one I decided would be my masterpiece, and it would begin exactly where he ended. The Grand Lambra ballroom looked like a dream carved out of crystal and arrogance. Gold chandeliers hung low, spilling light across champagne flutes and flawless smiles. Every corner smelled of money-imported flowers, vintage liquor, designer perfume. The kind of scent that pretended to be timeless but always expired when the cameras left. I stood by the entrance for a moment, letting the scene settle. The air was thick with the sound of people congratulating themselves. Every laugh felt rehearsed. Every hug was a transaction. I could almost hear Leon's voice echoing across the room, the same tone he'd used since we were kids. "Success, Amara, is about presentation." He'd said it when we were 12, when he ironed his school shirts 3 times before class and corrected my posture during dinner. Back then I thought he was trying to help. Now I knew better. He was training me to lose quietly. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I made my way toward the bar. Heads turned, curious measuring. The black dress I wore was simple, a high neckline, clean silhouette, the kind of cut people overlook unless they understand craftsmanship. To most, I probably looked underdressed. To a trained eye, I looked untouchable. Amara. I turned. Sienna Hart. Leon's fiancée stood a few steps away, flawless as usual, her champagne-colored gown hugging her body like a secret. Her smile was practiced, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's been years," she said, leaning in for a quick cold kiss on the cheek. "You look different." "Different good or different bad?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Just different. Still minimalist, I see." "Thank you," I smiled. "Still perfect, I see." "Thank you." Her eyes flickered sharp for a moment, then smoothed back into charm. "Leon will be thrilled you came. He was worried you'd avoid the press." "I don't avoid them," I said, picking up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "I just give them better things to talk about." Before she could reply, a photographer called her name and she glided away with the grace of a woman used to being watched. I stayed near the bar observing. That's what I did best: watch, listen, collect. My grandmother used to say, "You can learn everything about power by watching who laughs the loudest and who never laughs at all." Leon was, as expected, the loudest man in the room. He stood under a halo of light, surrounded by people who looked at him like an investment. His suit was perfectly tailored, his smile wide, his hand never far from Sienna's waist. He looked like success personified. But I knew that smile. It was the same one he'd worn when he told me to give up on my little dream years ago. "Maybe fashion's just not your lane, Amara," he'd said once, sipping his drink, as my first studio crumbled under debt. "You're emotional, not strategic. Leave business to the ones who can handle pressure." I'd said nothing then, because I was still learning that silence could be sharper than any retort. Now, years later, as the orchestra swelled and waiters moved like shadows between the wealthy, I watched him bask in attention built on illusions. He believed I was still the same little sister, the quiet, sentimental one. He had no idea that the company paying for half this event, the same luxury conglomerate that owned his new modeling brand, Ciela, now answered to me. Marcus's text flashed on my phone as if on cue. "Transfer confirmed. Ciela officially under AM Atelier. Effective immediately." I stared at the screen for a heartbeat, then slid the phone back into my clutch. "Still keeping to yourself," I turned. Robert Devenne, head of Ciela's American division, offered me a polite smile. The last time I saw him, he'd rejected one of my early designs, saying it lacked vision. "Mr. Devenne," I said smoothly. "Enjoying the party?" "Trying to," he said, swirling his drink. "Leon's quite the charmer. It's hard not to like him." "Charm and integrity rarely share the same room," I said. He chuckled awkwardly. "You always had a sharp tongue." "I learned restraint," I replied. "It lasts longer." Before he could answer, Leon's voice rose from the stage, commanding the room like a conductor. "Everyone. Can I have your attention?" The music faded. Cameras turned. He raised his glass, glowing under the lights. "I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight," he said, his tone rich and rehearsed. "It means everything to celebrate success with family and friends, especially my sister Amara, who finally decided to join us from wherever she's been hiding." Polite laughter scattered through the crowd. I kept my expression neutral. Leon grinned wider. "Amara's always been creative. I mean, she once made me a tie from old curtains when we were college kids. She said it was couture." He chuckled. Still dressing thrifty sis, more laughter. Too loud, too eager. I raised my glass slightly, my voice calm. For a moment, silence rippled through the crowd like static. Then polite applause, nervous smiles, the sound of people pretending not to pick sides. Leon recovered quickly, flashing his smile again. "Always the clever one," he said. "That's my sister." He moved on with his speech, oblivious to the fact that across the room, one of the televisions near the bar flickered to life with a muted news segment. The logo spinning on the screen caught my eye, CNBC Business Hour recap. And then it happened. The anchor's voice carried faintly through the speakers. "In breaking news, AM Atelier has finalized its acquisition of Ciela, marking a major shift in global luxury holdings. The mysterious CEO, E. Amari, continues to dominate the fashion world with unprecedented discretion and power." The Ciela logo gleamed across the screen, right above the tagline, "Reinventing elegance under new leadership." Someone near the bar turned to look at me, recognition dawning. I caught Leon's gaze across the ballroom just as he noticed the screen behind me. His voice faltered mid-sentence. He looked between the TV and me, confusion flickering into disbelief. Sienna's hand slipped from his arm. "Leon," she whispered, "isn't that—" The anchor continued, AM. Atelier, now estimated at over $3 billion in valuation, has been led by the elusive E. Amari, whose designs have redefined modern couture. The guests turned, murmuring. Some gasped. Others stared at me, at my unbranded black dress, at the woman Leon had just mocked. I lifted my champagne calm and said softly, "To consistency." Leon's face was drained of color. For the first time in years, he didn't have a script. The room fell into silence so heavy it felt sacred. Even the band stopped playing. I set my glass down gently, the sound sharp against marble. It was poetic, really, the unveiling happening not with a shout, but with a whisper. The irony was perfect. The man who mocked me for sewing curtains was now a model for the empire built from those same stitches. I turned, walking past the sea of stunned faces, the chandeliers reflecting in my bracelet like stars. As I reached the exit, I glanced once more at the screen, at the words, "Beneath my pseudonym, founder and CEO AM Atelier." I smiled. He always wanted an audience. Tonight he got one. Only the story wasn't his anymore. It was mine. The morning after the party, the city buzzed like a beehive made of glass and gossip. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating, headlines, interview requests, invitations. Every notification carried my pseudonym. Every subject line screamed the same words in different fonts, E. Amari revealed. For the first time in 3 years, the invisible designer had a face. Mine. I stood barefoot by the window of my apartment, the skyline shimmering under a pale Los Angeles sun. The air smelled of wet concrete and something else, aftermath. I hadn't slept. I didn't feel tired either. Just still, like the pause before the next storm. Marcus arrived without knocking, holding 2 coffees and a folder. He placed them on the counter, his expression unreadable. "Congratulations," he said finally. "You detonated the entire fashion world in one night." "Detonated?" I asked, taking the coffee. "I prefer illuminated." He smirked. "The Whitman Group just called. Ciella's parent company wants to renegotiate contracts. And your brother's silent," I said. "That's a first. He won't stay quiet long. I'm counting on that." Marcus opened the folder, photos from last night's coverage, screenshots of trending hashtags, "The Silenton CEO," "The Real Designer." My face, once anonymous, was suddenly everywhere. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I turned toward the window, watching sunlight crawl over the city's glass towers. "No," I said quietly. "I just didn't expect silence to sound this loud." By noon, every major outlet had called. Vogue wanted an exclusive. Business Insider requested a live interview. Even Forbes sent a reporter to camp in the lobby. My assistant Jenna was panicking. "They won't stop calling," she said, breathless. "Even Good Morning America wants to fly you to New York tonight." "Let them wait," I said. "I'm not performing." "But the PR value." "I don't sell stories," I interrupted. "I sell designs." Jenna hesitated, then nodded and left. The room went quiet again. I looked at the reflection of my apartment in the glass, clean lines, muted tones, an empire built on calm control. I'd spent years perfecting this silence, and now the world was trying to shatter it with applause. My phone rang again, Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Then Dad. I ignored that too. When it rang a third time, Leon. I almost laughed. I answered. Amara, his voice came through rough, uncertain. "We need to talk. Do we—" "You blindsided me." I returned the favor, I said. "Publicly. You humiliated me in front of everyone." "No, Leon," I cut in. "You set the fire to your own house." I just stood back and watched the truth burn brighter. He was silent for a moment. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said softly. "It makes me free." He hung up. I didn't call back. By evening, the world had turned my life into a headline. From outsider to empire, the the seamstress who outsmarted Wall Street, sibling rivalry in silk and steel. Every photo of me looked the same, calm, poised, unreachable. But inside, I wasn't unreachable. I was remembering. The fire. The studio was reduced to ash. The nights sewing by candlelight because I couldn't afford the power bill. The day Leon called and said, "Just come work for me, Amara. I'll make sure you get paid." I'd said no. I'd rather starve on my own terms than eat on his. Now standing in my penthouse overlooking the city, I realized I hadn't been starving, I'd been gathering. Patience, precision, proof. Marcus reappeared, holding his phone. "Whitman's legal team is panicking," he said. "They didn't know about your stake in Ciela. The merger's solid, though. You own controlling shares." "Good," I said. "Then it's time." "Time for what?" I walked to my desk, opened a locked drawer, and took out a leather-bound file marked Operation Exposure. Inside were documents, contracts, patents, copyright certificates, digital timestamps, everything Leon had ever stolen. "Remember the designs he sold to the Davin investors 5 years ago?" I asked. "The ones labeled as his original line." Marcus nodded. "They were yours." I placed the proof on the table. "They always were." He looked at me carefully. "You're going to release this, yes. But not as revenge, as a record." He tilted his head. "Same result." "Maybe," I said. "But one of them feels cleaner." The press conference was small, just enough journalists to make the world listen. The setting was minimalist, deliberate white walls, one podium, no theatrics. I'd never needed spectacle. The truth was loud enough on its own. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steady. For years I created under a different name. I did it to build without interference, to prove that art doesn't need permission. But in doing so, others took credit for work they didn't create. Tonight that ends. Behind me a screen displayed digital records, sketches, prototypes, emails. Leon's name appeared again and again beside mine, attached to stolen drafts. I continued. "These designs were mine. The evidence speaks for itself. This isn't vengeance. This is restoration." The reporters murmured. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. "What about your brother? Will you press charges? Are you cutting ties?" I met their eyes one by one. Family and fairness aren't the same thing, I said. Sometimes you have to let one go to keep the other alive. The room went quiet, and then applause. Not loud, but real. Afterward, Marcus joined me backstage. "You just buried him," he said. I shook my head. "No, I just stopped carrying him." That night I drove aimlessly through the city. Every streetlight looked like a thread, every shadow like a memory. I ended up outside our childhood home, the old brick house with the hydrangeas my mother still tended. Lights were on. For a moment I almost went in. But then I remembered all the years they told me to be grateful for what Leon gave me, for what he allowed me. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but earned. My phone buzzed with one last message from Marcus Press, calling it poetic justice. I smiled faintly, staring at the house. Poetic justice. No, it wasn't justice. It was true, finally unclothed. And like the best designs, it fits perfectly. The call came just after sunset, when the city outside my window had begun to blur into gold and glass. My mother's voice was calm, too calm. "Come home tonight," she said. "Your father and I need to talk." I almost laughed. Home. That word hadn't belonged to me in years. But something in her tone, a tremor hidden beneath the control, made me say yes. An hour later, I stood on the old stone porch of our family house in Westport. The hydrangeas were still there, overgrown and heavy with dew. The same brass knocker I'd once polished as a child gleamed faintly under the porch light. I hesitated, then knocked. My father opened the door before I could touch it again. "You're late," he said. "I came," I replied. "That's more than Leon did when Grandma died." He didn't answer, just turned and walked back inside. The smell hit me first. Lavender, expensive wine, and something older, resentment. The dining room looked exactly as it always had. My mother sat at the end of the long oak table, hands folded, expression perfect. Only one thing was different. There were 3 plates instead of 4. Leon's seat was empty. I sat down without being asked. So I said family dinner, just like old times. My father's jaw tightened. You humiliated your brother. He humiliated himself, I said. I just turned on the lights. My mother's voice trembled slightly, though her face stayed smooth. You didn't have to do it publicly. No, I said. But that's the only language he understands the audience. Her lips thinned. You've changed. Finally. The silence that followed felt thick enough to chew. The clock in the corner ticked like a metronome, counting down to something inevitable. My father broke first. Leon's career is in ruins, he said. His engagement is over. The Whitman contract is gone. You've destroyed him. I looked at him. No, Dad. He destroyed himself when he forged Grandma's signature to take control of her company. My mother's eyes widened. You don't know what you're talking about. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Actually, I do. Those are deed transfers, falsified contracts, fake board approvals, all signed by Leon, notarized under your name. My father's face went white. Where did you get that? From Grandma's attorney, the one you fired. For a long time, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock. My mother finally spoke, her voice low. What are you going to do with it? Nothing, I said, unless Leon tries to drag me to court. Then it becomes evidence. My father slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp. You think this gives you the right to judge us? I met his eyes. No, it makes me free. He leaned back, staring at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. My mother reached for her wine glass, her hand shaking slightly. You've always been dramatic, Amara. You could have handled this quietly. Quietly, I laughed once hollow. Like when you told me to stay silent while he took credit for my work. Like when you said, family first, as he rewrote Grandma's will. Her face tightened. We did what we thought was best for the family. No, I said. You did what was easiest. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It was exposure. My father stood pacing. You have no idea how much pressure we were under. Leon was the face of this family. Investors' partners were more important than the truth I finished. He turned on me. Enough, I didn't flinch. No. Enough was years ago. The silence that followed was long, brittle, the kind that cracks something permanently. My mother finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. Your brother is gone, Amara. I frowned. Gone. He packed his things. No one's seen him since yesterday. Good, I almost said. But the word lodged somewhere between my chest and my throat. He's embarrassed, my mother said. He'll come back once he cools down. But you, she stopped, searching for words. You've made a spectacle of us. I stood slowly. You raised me to sow, not to speak. To endure, not to challenge. I learned the hard way that silence doesn't save anyone. It only buries them. My father's expression hardened. You'll regret this one day. Maybe, I said, but at least it'll be my regret. I walked toward the door, the sound of my heels echoing against the hardwood. Before stepping outside, I turned back once more. Grandma used to sit under that oak tree every evening, I said. She'd watch the light change and say, every generation either builds or burns. You both chose to burn. I'm done cleaning up the ashes. My mother's voice broke just slightly. Her eyes held a sudden raw glimmer of genuine defeat. Amara, please. But I was already outside. The air was cold and sharp, cutting against my skin. The sky above was bruised purple, the kind of twilight that feels like an ending. I stood for a moment under the old oak, running my fingers over its rough bark. The wind carried the faintest scent of lavender from my mother's garden. It's done, I whispered. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Marcus. Leon's lawyers backed off. Whitman withdrew support. Stocks are collapsing. I typed one word back, good. When I looked up, the stars had started to pierce through the dark. They looked steady, unbothered, older than all of this. I took one last look at the house, the windows glowing warm against the night, and turned away. For years I'd been fighting for recognition, for justice, for balance. But as I walked down that quiet suburban street, I realized something else had happened. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was finished. And finishing, I realized, was its own kind of freedom. The morning after that confrontation, I woke to a gray sky and the sound of rain against glass. The city felt quieter than usual, as if even it was holding its breath. The folder from last night still sat on my kitchen counter, edges curling slightly where my fingers had pressed too hard. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it contained: proof that my brother had tried to steal more than money or credit. He'd tried to rewrite blood. Marcus showed up early, his coat damp from the weather. He didn't bother with small talk. "It's time," he said, dropping a new folder beside the old one. Vivian Monroe's trust clause. Just hearing my grandmother's name was enough to make my throat tighten. "You found it. Howard Nathanson sent it this morning," he said. "It's interesting." I took the folder, the paper inside smelling faintly of dust and cedar. The will was dated 12 years ago, written in her signature, bold, slanted handwriting. I traced the opening line with my thumb. Monroe Holdings was more than just a name. It was the legacy textile and manufacturing house my grandmother founded, the bedrock of the very industry Leon had tried to co-opt with cheap spectacle. Securing it meant reclaiming the foundation of ethical fashion she had fought for. To my granddaughter, Amara Castillo, I leave not just what is mine, but what they will one day try to take. I looked up. She knew. Marcus nodded. She always knew. Read the next section. The clause was simple and brutal. Any heir acting in bad faith against the company's integrity would automatically forfeit their share to the executor, me. It means Leon's finished," Marcus said. He voided his inheritance the moment he forged those contracts. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Not because of victory, but because of how clean it felt. Not sharp, not cruel. Just inevitable. Marcus studied me. You could enforce it quietly. No press, no spectacle. I closed the folder slowly. Quiet has never worked in this family. They used it like a weapon. Maybe it's time they feel what honesty sounds like. He sighed, half amusement, half admiration. "You really are your grandmother's granddaughter." "Let's make it official," I said. By noon, the conference room at AM Atelier was filled with the low hum of restrained excitement. My legal team sat in polished rows, laptops, open pens poised. The clause documents were projected onto the wall behind me, Vivian Monroe's words glowing in digital light. Effective immediately, I said, Leon Castillo's shares in the Monroe Trust are nullified under Section 14C. All rights and profits revert to the executor. One of the lawyers hesitated. "That makes you the sole owner of both Monroe Holdings and the Atelier subsidiary." I nodded. "Correct." A murmur passed through the room. Respect, awe, fear, maybe all three. Another lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Castillo, would you like us to prepare a press statement?" "Yes," I said. "But make it about legacy, not loss." When the meeting ended, Marcus stayed behind. "You realize this will destroy any chance of reconciliation." I looked at the projection fading on the wall. "Reconciliation isn't the same as forgiveness." He tilted his head. "Then what is peace?" I said. "And I already have that." By evening, the press release went live. The headlines were immediate. AM Atelier declares sole ownership of Monroe Holdings. Vivian Monroe's hidden clause changes industry power structure. The world called it historic. My family called it betrayal. The first call came from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. The second came from my father. I ignored it too. But the third came from an unknown number, and when I answered, it wasn't a voice I expected. Amara. Leon's voice was hoarse quiet. "You're lucky I picked up," I said. He exhaled slowly. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did. I made mistakes." "No," I said softly. You made choices. He didn't argue. The silence between us stretched until it felt like another life. I don't have anything left, he said finally. No company, no investors, not even Sienna. Then start over, I said. Without stealing someone else's foundation. He laughed bitter. Easy for you to say, sitting in that tower. Do you really think towers build themselves? I asked. I built mine from the ground you left burning. He went quiet again. Then almost a whisper, I never hated you. You know, lying doesn't suit you, I said, and hung up. That night Marcus found me still in my office. The city glittered beyond the glass, every light a pulse of noise I didn't feel. You did it, he said. You're officially untouchable. I shook my head. No one's untouchable. I just finally stopped being afraid. He smiled faintly. The world's calling this poetic justice. Let them, I said. They need a story. I just need silence. Marcus hesitated before leaving. Your grandmother would have been proud. She'd tell me to keep my stitches straight, I said, even when my hands shake. After he left, I sat there for a long time staring at the folder, her handwriting, her signature, her faith. She hadn't just left me an inheritance. She'd left me a map, and I had followed it to the letter. By midnight, the city had gone quiet again. I stood by the window watching the rain turn the streets into rivers of light. Somewhere out there, Leon was probably packing the last of his things, still convinced he could fix it all. He couldn't. But maybe that was the point. I poured myself a glass of wine, lifted it to the night, and whispered, "To you, Grandma," for teaching me the power of timing. The thunder rolled in the distance, low and deliberate, like applause that only I could hear. And for the first time, it didn't sound like revenge anymore. It sounded like a restoration. I stood at the window a moment longer, looking down at the city I now held not in anger but in steady, focused hands. The past was settled. The future was merely waiting for its design. The invitation arrived 3 weeks later, gold-embossed, perfumed, and pretentious. I didn't have to read the name to know who sent it. Robert Whitman. The same man who once laughed at my ambition when I pitched him my first collection. This time his handwriting was less smug, more desperate. An intimate dinner to discuss business opportunities. I almost smiled. The man had no idea I already owned the majority of his collapsing company. When Marcus handed me the envelope, he didn't even ask if I was going. "You're not seriously considering this," he said flatly. "I'm not considering it," I said. "I'm confirming." He sighed. "You're walking into a nest of vultures. Then it's a good thing I'm bringing the storm." The Whitman Club was as decadent as I remembered, mahogany wall chandeliers that dripped like icicles, portraits of dead men who'd never worked a day in their lives. Power here wasn't spoken. It was served with the wine. The valet took my coat with trembling hands. Recognition flickered in his eyes, though he probably didn't know why. The last time I'd walked into this building, I was invisible. Tonight, every camera wanted my face. Inside, I found the dining room already prepared. A long table gleamed under candlelight, every glass set with obsessive symmetry. Robert Whitman stood near the bar, bourbon in hand, confidence in place, but there was something different now. A tremor in his wrist, a crack in the veneer. "Miss Castillo," he said, voice oily with charm. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Whitman," I replied evenly. I was curious. "Curiosity is the seed of opportunity," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He gestured toward the table, and I saw them, Leon and Sienna. My brother looked smaller somehow, his usual arrogance stripped down to a nervous polish. Sienna sat beside him, her eyes glassy, the faint tremor of someone who hadn't slept in days. Leon stood as I approached. "You didn't tell me you'd be here," he said, his voice trying and failing to sound steady. "I like surprises," I said. Robert raised his glass. "Then tonight should be delightful." We took our seats. The air was thick with unspoken history. The waiter poured wine, and for a long moment no one said a word. Finally, Robert broke the silence. "I'll get straight to it. Whitman Textiles is in trouble. The press exaggerates, of course, but We're facing liquidity issues. We're looking for a strategic investor to stabilize the company. I let the words hang, watching the candlelight flicker across his face. And you thought of me. He smiled tightly. Naturally. AM. Atelier has made bold moves. You've proven yourself. Formidable. I took a slow sip of wine. You mean the 22% of your stock I purchased last week? The room went still. Sienna's fork clattered against her plate. Leon froze, staring at me like I'd spoken another language. Robert's smile cracked for the first time. That was you. Technically, it was Monroe Holdings, I said. But yes. Which means I now control a majority interest in Whitman Textiles. This dinner I placed my glass down gently is unnecessary. Leon's voice rose brittle. You did this to ruin me. No, I said. You did that yourself when you forged Grandma's signature. I'm just collecting what belongs to our family. Robert exhaled, slow and deliberate. You think you can manage this company better than me? I don't think, I said softly. I know. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. Be careful, Miss Castillo. Power shifts quickly. Isolation comes with the throne. Then it's a good thing I've learned to rule alone. Sienna stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is madness, she said, voice shaking. You can't just waltz in here, and I looked at her, calm and unblinking. You wore one of my designs on your wedding day, Sienna. Don't lecture me about what I can or can't do. Her face was drained of color. I didn't know. You didn't ask, I interrupted. No one ever does. Robert pushed back his chair, his patience gone. If you intend to take my company, at least do it properly. Name your terms. Simple, I said. You step down as CEO. Leon resigns from the board. You both keep a minor stake in your dignity, or you fight me and lose everything. He stared at me for a long moment before letting out a short, bitter laugh. You really are your grandmother's granddaughter. I take that as a compliment. The waiter entered awkwardly, asking if anyone wanted dessert. No one answered. Leon finally broke the silence, his voice low. You've changed. No, I said. I just stopped apologizing for existing. I stood gathering my clutch. Gentlemen, thank you for dinner. As I walked toward the door, Robert's voice followed me, colder now. You may win this round, Miss Castillo. But storms always pass. I didn't look back. Then I'll build an empire that doesn't depend on weather. Marcus was waiting outside by the car, leaning against the door, phone in hand. How'd it go? Exactly as planned, I said. He opened the door for me. They're finished. They just don't know it yet. As we pulled away from the curb, the first low rumble of thunder rolled across the city. The sound wasn't threatening, it was approving. The streets glistened with rain, reflections of gold and red lights blurring together like molten silk. I glanced out the window at the darkened skyline. You know what Grandma used to say? Marcus shook his head. Power is quiet until it isn't. He smiled faintly. Sounds like you're about to make some noise. I turned toward the city lights, their glow sharp against the storm. Oh, I'm done whispering. The thunder answered again, deeper this time. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like applause. The conference hall smelled like power and fear, two scents I'd grown used to. Rows of reporters filled the space cameras, flashing like lightning against the silver backdrop that bore my company's name, Monroe Holdings. Beneath it, the headline, every outlet had been waiting for, glowed in bold letters, Whitman Textiles acquired. The noise in the room was constant, a low hum of greed disguised as curiosity. Everyone wanted a soundbite, a scandal, a crack in the armor of the woman who'd turned a family feud into an empire. I adjusted the cuff of my black blazer and stepped up to the podium as Marcus leaned toward me. They'll go for blood, he whispered. Be polite, but don't flinch. I never do, I said. The PR director gave the countdown. We live in 5-4. And then the lights hit. Good morning, I began, my voice echoing through the hall. I know many of you have questions, so let's start with the one that matters. Yes, as of last night, Monroe Holdings has acquired a controlling interest in Whitman Textiles. A wave of noise erupted, overlapping voices. The snap of camera shutters, hands raised like weapons. I let them speak over each other until the chaos folded into silence again. This acquisition isn't revenge, I continued. It's restoration. Whitman Textiles once stood for craftsmanship and innovation. Those values were stolen first from the workers, then from its founder, my grandmother, Vivian Monroe. Today, that legacy returns to where it belongs. Reporters scribbled furiously, their faces a mix of shock and delight. I saw one of them glance at Marcus, whispering to a colleague, "She's not even looking at notes." Another voice called out, sharp and eager, "Miss Castillo, are you confirming that your grandmother's designs were stolen?" "Yes," I said simply, "and I have the records to prove it." Marcus stepped forward and placed a leather-bound ledger on the podium. The camera zoomed in, clicking rapidly. Inside were pages of sketches, dates, signatures, all bearing my grandmother's initials. Every design, I said, flipping to a page marked Spring 1978, was presented as someone else's work. This is not speculation. It's documentation. The room buzzed, murmurs building into disbelief. Another reporter shouted, "What happened to Leon Castillo? Will he face legal action?" I paused. The question hung there heavy. "He's family," I said finally. "And the family doesn't get fired. They get forgotten." Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus's mouth twitched into the smallest hint of a smile. "Any other questions?" I asked. A woman near the front raised her hand. "Do you consider yourself a billionaire now?" I looked straight into the nearest camera lens. "I consider myself a builder. Money is scaffolding. Legacy is the foundation." Silence fell for a moment, the kind that doesn't come from emptiness, but from awe. Then the applause began. Hesitant at first, then stronger, louder, echoing off the walls. Marcus leaned close again, voice low. "You just added $2 billion to our valuation." "Then it's been a productive morning," I said. Afterward, in the private lounge, I slipped off my heels and poured a glass of water. My reflection in the window looked like someone I didn't recognize, calm, composed, untouchable. The girl who used to sew by candlelight wasn't gone. She was just standing taller now. Marcus walked in, phone in hand. "You realize what you just did, right? You didn't just buy a company. You rewrote history." "Good," I said. "It needed rewriting." He hesitated, watching me. "Leon's name is trending. People are calling him the fallen prince." "Let them," I said. "Every story needs a villain. And you, the quiet architect." He laughed softly. "That's going to stick." The door opened behind him. My mother stepped in, elegant as always, though her eyes were tired. I hadn't seen her since the night I walked out of that house. "Mom," I said, my voice unreadable. She closed the door behind her, her pearls glinting under the light. "That was quite a performance." "It wasn't a performance," I said. "It was the truth." She sighed. "You sound just like her." "Grandma?" She nodded. "And that scares me." I turned back to the window. "It shouldn't. Leon's in trouble," she said quietly. "He's drinking. The press won't leave him alone. Then he should call a therapist," I said. "Not me." Her voice trembled. "He's your brother." "He was," I said, "before he chose to become my enemy." For a moment, neither of us spoke. She took a step closer. "Vivian would be proud of what you built," she said softly. "But she'd tell you something too. Revenge doesn't keep you warm at night." I turned to face her fully. "Neither does betrayal." She flinched the way truth makes people flinch when they've run out of excuses. A single teardrop tracked a path through her foundation makeup, a flicker of humanity she quickly swiped away. When she left, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. Marcus returned a few minutes later. "The press wants a follow-up statement," he said. "Tell them the era of stolen credit is over." He grinned. "That'll trend for sure." "Good," I said. "It should." Outside, the city buzzed under the fading sunlight. Somewhere out there, Leon was unraveling the same way I once did, except I had built my refuge out of the ashes while he only saw the destruction. My time for carrying his burden was definitively over. Thanksgiving arrived like a storm I saw coming but couldn't quite avoid. My mother had insisted I come just dinner, she'd said, but in our family, dinner was never just dinner. It was served with cranberry sauce. Marcus helped me load dessert boxes into the car. "Don't start a scene," he said. "I don't start scenes," I replied, closing the trunk. I finished them. The drive to Westport was long and gray, the sky heavy with clouds. By the time I turned into the gravel driveway, laughter was already spilling from the open windows. Leon's laughter. Inside, everything looked the same. The polished silver, the fine china, the air of restrained tension. My mother stood by the oven, wearing pearls like armor. My father hovered near the table, carving the turkey with unnecessary precision. Leon sat at the head of the table, a glass of wine in hand, already half drunk on charm. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said, standing as if he owned the room. "Miss CEO herself." "No entourage tonight? Just me," I said, setting the pies on the counter. "Didn't think your dining room could fit my empire." He smirked, still humble as ever. Sienna looked down at her plate, silent. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, her eyes glassy. She hadn't spoken to me since the Whitman takeover. My mother cleared her throat. "Let's all try to be civil. It's Thanksgiving." "Of course," I said. "Nothing says gratitude like family pretending not to hate each other." My father shot me a look. "That's enough, Amara." "No," I said. "Enough was years ago." The room froze. Only the clock ticked loud and merciless. Leon laughed, though it cracked halfway through. "Come on, Amara. You won. You got your revenge. You humiliated me, destroyed my reputation, took my company. What else do you want?" "Accountability," I said. He raised his glass, bitter. "Then consider this my confession. I underestimated you. Happy now?" "No," I said. "Because you still don't understand. This was never about winning. It was about the truth." My mother's voice trembled. "She built this family's name, Leon. Don't you dare speak about her that way." Leon slammed his glass down. "She built her name. We were just her shadows." His words hit harder than he realized. The fear in them was familiar, the same fear Grandma had written about in her last letter. "They will betray you, not out of evil, but out of fear." I saw it clearly now. Leon hadn't been born cruel. He'd been born terrified of being ordinary, of being second best, of standing next to a woman who didn't need applause. Dinner passed in fragments. My mother filled the silence with stories no one listened to. My father carved, chewed, and drank in a mechanical rhythm. I tasted nothing. Every bite felt like swallowing dust. Halfway through dessert, Sienna stood abruptly. "Excuse me," she murmured. "I have a headache." Leon followed her out a minute later. Their voices carried faintly through the hallway door, urgent, strained. I paused, hearing the sharp, low tone of Leon's voice. It wasn't anger, but panic. I moved closer to the doorway, feigning interest in a painting but listening intently to the tension in Sienna's reply. "Shares." I moved closer, silent as breath. "She hasn't won yet," Leon whispered fiercely. "Dad still controls the remaining Monroe estate shares. If we can get him to transfer them to me before she files the trust papers, she loses the majority." "Are you sure?" Sienna's voice was small. "I've already talked to the lawyer. We do it quietly and she won't see it coming." I stepped into the doorway. "You really should have learned by now," I said. "I always see it coming." Leon spun around, pale. "Amara." My father entered at that moment, confusion etched across his face. "What's going on here?" I turned to him. "You're giving him the estate shares, aren't you?" He hesitated, and that was enough. "I just thought," he began, but his voice faltered. "You thought wrong," I said coldly. "Grandma left those in trust for the company's stability, not for another Navarro ego trip." Leon's jaw tightened. "You don't control this family." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I control the empire. It lives on. The family just follows or fades." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother began to cry softly into her napkin. My father looked away, shame etched in every line of his face. Leon stared at me, hatred and helplessness colliding behind his eyes. "You call this victory, Amara leaving nothing behind?" "It makes me done," I replied. I picked up my coat. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner. I have a business to run." Outside, the air was sharp and cold, biting against my skin. The lights of the house glowed behind me, warm and distant, like a memory I no longer belonged to. My phone buzzed as I reached the car. Marcus. How bad was it? Worse than expected, I typed back. But it's time. Time for what? The inheritance clause, I wrote. If they want a war, I'll give them a master class in how it's won. I started the engine, the headlights slicing through the dark. For the first time, I didn't feel anger pulsing in my veins. I felt clarity. Cold, precise, unstoppable. Behind me, the house that had once been my whole world grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it was nothing more than a pinprick of gold swallowed by night. The road ahead gleamed slick with rain, and I pressed harder on the gas. Grandma's words came back to me like a whisper from the dark. Power isn't about noise, Amara. It's about endurance. I smiled to myself. Endurance was something I had in abundance. The war was dirty, but my resolve was finally clean. The morning after Thanksgiving, the city felt sharper, colder, like even the air had taken sides. I sat in my office before sunrise, the skyline outside still ghosted in silver fog. The letters from Grandma Vivian were spread across my desk like scripture ink, faded edges, worn words that had built the spine of my patience. Marcus walked in carrying 2 coffees and a folder marked legal, urgent. He didn't sit. It's time, he said simply. I nodded. The inheritance clause. He placed the papers in front of me, his tone steady, but his eyes gleaming. Vivian Monroe's trust included a conditional clause. You're the executor, but it activates automatically if any heir acts in bad faith against the company. They forfeit their shares instantly. I flipped through the documents, scanning her handwriting and the notarized pages beneath. The words were unyielding, elegant, and final. So if Leon tried to move the assets last night, he already voided his claim, Marcus said. You just have to sign here to enforce it. For a long moment, I just stared at the line. My name was printed neatly beneath it, waiting. Signing meant the end of every tie I had left to my brother. Signing meant peace or something colder that looked like it. Do it, Marcus said softly. I picked up the pen. This isn't about revenge anymore, I said. It's about definition. The ink flowed across the paper, smooth and deliberate. The sound was almost too quiet for something so permanent. Done, I whispered. Marcus exhaled. You just redrew the future. Good, I said. It was starting to look too much like the past. By noon, the office buzzed with precision, the legal team drafting statements, PR preparing controlled leaks, finance aligning numbers that would make headlines by morning. Every moving piece of the empire throbbed like a single pulse under my control. Outside snow began to fall thin and deliberate. My phone rang. Leon. I let it ring twice before answering. You think you've won? He said, his voice slurred, brittle. I think I finished, I replied. You can't erase me, Amara. I'm part of this company. I'm part of Grandma's legacy. No, I said calmly. You're part of her warning. You're not invincible, he snapped. You're just playing with money she built. I smiled faintly. You're right. I was too busy building an empire you never saw coming. He laughed, the sound dry and cracked. You'll regret this. I already regret ever trusting you, I said, and hung up. Marcus entered just as I set the phone down. You're going to want to see this. He handed me another folder, his expression unreadable. What now? Your father transferred his estate shares to Leon 2 days ago. Retroactively dated. I felt my pulse slow, not rise. So they forged again. He nodded grimly. But it doesn't matter. The clause overrides it. Fraud voids everything. I stood and walked to the window. Below, the city looked like a snow globe. Tiny cars, pale lights, people moving through the cold, unaware that the balance of power had shifted above them. File it, I said quietly. Enforce the clause. Marcus hesitated. Once it's public, there's no coming back. You'll destroy him. He destroyed himself, I said. I'm just turning on the lights. The next 48 hours unfolded like a chess game I'd already memorized. The board shifted. The players fell. The official statement went live. Monday morning, effective immediately, the Monroe Trust invokes Section 14C of the Inheritance Clause, transferring full ownership of all Monroe and Whitman assets to Miss Amara Castillo. By noon, every business journal in America had printed it. Stocks doubled. Investors called it a return to form. The headlines blurred together: the woman who outplayed the dynasty, Monroe restored. My phone lit up again that night. Leon! I didn't answer. Then my mother's number appeared. This time I did. Her voice was shaking. Your brother's gone. I sighed, the sound tired. He left a while ago, Mom. What do you mean now he left? No note. No call. His apartment's empty. I closed my eyes. For a moment the world tilted. The finality of it, months after the first frantic call, felt duller, heavier. Did you check with Sienna? She's the one who found it like that. I pressed my fingers against the desk, grounding myself. Then let him go. Amara, please. He's still your brother. He made his choice, I said. When I hung up, the silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I walked to the window again. The snow had thickened, softening the sharp edges of the city. Revenge had always looked cleaner in my imagination, sharp, justified, almost beautiful. In reality, it was messy, human, unbearably quiet afterward. My phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus. Clause executed. Media response positive. Congratulations, CEO. I set the phone down and looked out at the falling snow. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, muted this time, almost sorrowful. Grandma's words came back to me, steady and cold. Being underestimated is a weapon. But victory means knowing when to stop cutting. I took a slow breath. The war was over. The empire was mine. And yet the silence that followed carried the strange, unfamiliar emptiness of a battle won alone. It wasn't a triumph. It was a stark reality. Hours later, I found myself sitting at my desk, the papers signed, sealed, filed. The city below was still and pale, blanketed in white. I reached for the last of Grandma's letters, the one I'd read only once before. They will betray you, not from hate, but from fear. Remember this: revenge will tempt you, but legacy will last longer. I folded it carefully, placing it back into its envelope. Legacy, not revenge. Maybe she had known all along that I'd have to lose one to understand the other. Outside, the snow kept falling, slow, endless cleansing. The city was muted, blanketed in white. And for the first time since the fire that nearly ended everything, I let myself close my eyes and breathe. The empire no longer needed my rage. It needed my clarity. It had both. The studio lights were merciless, white-hot, and unblinking. I sat at the center of them, a thin microphone clipped to my collar, cameras aimed from every angle. Across from me, the host of Good Morning America smiled like he'd been waiting all week for this interview. Behind the cameras, Marcus stood just out of frame, his calm presence a quiet anchor. Ready, the producer said. I nodded once. 3, 2, 1, we're alive. Welcome back, the host began cheerfully. We're here today with Amara Castillo, the youngest female CEO to lead a billion-dollar merger in the fashion industry. Amara, thank you for joining us on Christmas morning. Thank you for having me, I said smoothly. My hands rested lightly in my lap. I wore one of my own designs, a white silk suit with a subtle metallic sheen. It wasn't armor. It was closed. He leaned forward, smile sharp. You've become quite the household name, especially after the Whitman acquisition, the inheritance clause, and the public fallout with your brother. People are calling it the most shocking family story since Succession. How do you respond to that? I smiled slightly, the kind of smile that disarms before it cuts. Families are complicated, I said. Ours just happened to play out under spotlights instead of behind closed doors. The audience laughed lightly, but the host wasn't finished. There are rumors your brother tried to take control of your company before disappearing. Do you know where he is? The room went still. I didn't blink. No, I said, but I hope he finds peace wherever that is. He hesitated, sensing the edge beneath my calm. Do you ever regret how far things went? Or the emotional cost of that kind of war? That question landed differently. For a heartbeat, the studio disappeared, and I saw the echoes of every night I'd worked alone by candlelight, every headline calling me ruthless, every silence that had followed victory. Regret, I said softly, allowing a short, audible pause before I continued. I regret believing that family and fairness were the same thing. They're not. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he smiled, as if realizing this wasn't a woman to be pitied, but one to be feared. Despite everything, you've inspired thousands of women, he said. You've built a global brand, own controlling shares in 5 companies, and have pledged a large portion of your profits to women-owned startups. Why? Because power means nothing if you're the only one who has it, I said. My grandmother built an empire and spent her life underestimated. I'm not here to be admired. I'm here to make sure no woman ever gets erased again. Applause broke through the silence, real this time, not polite. Even the host clapped once, quickly regaining his composure. One final question, he said. What's next for Amara Castillo? I smiled, slow and deliberate. Restoration, I said. Not revenge, not legacy. Restoration. The red light above the camera blinked off. We're clear, the producer called. The host stood shaking my hand. That line, he said quietly, is going to go viral. Marcus appeared beside me, handing me a bottle of water. You were perfect, he murmured. Too perfect, I said under my breath. Almost rehearsed. He chuckled. It's not a crime to look in control. We left the studio through a side exit. The city was still half asleep under a light layer of snow. Marcus handed me a cup of coffee as we walked through the plaza, steam curling into the cold. You know, he said quietly, Vivian used to do interviews like that too. Calm, dangerous, completely in control. I smiled faintly. She'd probably hate that I'm on TV. She'd be proud of what you said, he corrected. Maybe I said. But she'd remind me that the work isn't done. We reached the car. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something instinct maybe made me answer. Amara, a voice said. Small, trembling. It was Sienna. Sienna, I asked cautiously. Are you all right? I thought you should know, she said. Leon's in California. He checked into rehab last week. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. He's alive. Yes, she said quickly. He asked me to tell you he's sorry. The noise of the city faded into a blur. Thank you, I whispered. She hesitated. He said he watched your interview. He said you looked like your grandmother. My throat tightened. Tell him I said that I meant what I said on air. I hope he finds peace. The call ended. I stood there in the cold, the snow melting into my hair. The city sounds distant and forgiving. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel heavy. Marcus watched me quietly from a few steps away. You okay? I think so, I said, surprising myself with how true it sounded. I think the fighting is finally over. I looked down at the thin silver bracelet on my wrist. It wasn't a piece of jewelry. It was a promise kept. I ran my thumb over the worn silver feeling, the tiny indentations that spoke of every single stitch my grandmother taught me. The bracelet felt lighter now, no longer a weight of expectation, but a quiet badge of survival. We got into the car, the city lights reflecting off the windshield. Outside, children laughed. Couples carried gifts. Life went on loud and unbothered by my wars. You know, Marcus said, glancing at me, the press is calling this your redemption arc. Let them, I said quietly. It's not redemption. It's released. Later that night, I stood alone in my apartment, the skyline glittering against the dark. The empire was steady. The name restored, the debts paid. But what lingered wasn't triumph. It was quiet. A peace so deep, it almost felt unfamiliar. I poured a glass of wine and looked at the mirror across the room. The woman staring back wasn't the one who'd once stitched thrifted fabric into dresses or cried over rejection letters. She wasn't the vengeful heir who plotted justice from the ashes either. She was something else entirely. Whole. Finally. The city hummed below like a heartbeat, constant and alive. I thought of Leon, of the boy who used to steal my pencils and make me laugh before he learned how to lie. Maybe he was still in there somewhere under the noise, under the guilt. Maybe healing wasn't about being right. Maybe it was about letting go of the need to win. I raised my glass to the skyline. To peace, I whispered. Outside, snow began to fall again, coating the city in a kind of mercy. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to him, to them, to anyone. The world could call it revenge. But I knew what it really was. Restoration. Spring came early that year, bright, restless, unseasonably warm. The city buzzed with the rhythm of renewal. But inside Monroe Tower, it was strategy, not sunshine, that filled the air. The annual shareholders' meeting was scheduled for Thursday, and every seat in the grand conference hall was already spoken for. From the stage, I could see the reflection of 100 faces in the mirrored walls, investors, journalists, rivals, and believers. All waiting for me to speak. All waiting to see what I would do next. Marcus stood near the edge of the stage, calm as always, a clipboard in hand. "We've had the best quarter in company history," he said quietly. "Stock's up 64%. You just have to say the words." I smiled faintly. "You make it sound like magic." He smirked. "It is. Only you're the magician everyone's betting on." When I walked on stage, the applause hit like a wave, sharp, deafening, relentless. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt heavy, a solid weight of expectation pressing against my ribs. This wasn't the joy of a battle won. It was the silence before a lifetime of maintenance. The crowd cheered the conqueror, but I knew the crown was far heavier than the armor had ever been. I stepped to the microphone. "Good afternoon," I began. My voice carried easily across the marble floors. When my grandmother built Monroe Holdings, she believed in patience. She used to say, "The best revenge isn't success, it's permanence." Today we proved her right. A ripple of attention moved through the crowd. Behind me, the giant screen lit up with a new logo, Monroe Global. Silver and gold. Clean. Commanding. "As of this morning," I continued, "we have acquired controlling shares in Devro Industries and Harper Textiles. Both will now operate under the Monroe Global umbrella. Our goal isn't domination. It's innovation. We'll redefine sustainable luxury, and we'll do it on our terms." The room erupted into murmurs of excitement. Cameras flashed. The stock ticker at the bottom of the live feed jumped in real time. Then from the second row, a man in a navy suit stood. Hedge fund type, expensive haircut, cheap empathy. "What about the Navarro family shares?" he asked, voice measured but laced with curiosity. "Rumor has it your brother still holds a small portion through the estate." I didn't flinch. "That's correct," I said. "Leon Navarro retains less than 1% of Monroe Global stock. And per his request, those shares will be converted into a charitable trust for addiction recovery programs nationwide." Silence. Then applause, soft at first, then swelling until it filled the room. Marcus looked at me from the wings, surprise flickering across his usually composed face. He hadn't known I planned to announce that. When the meeting ended, reporters swarmed the stage microphones and congratulations colliding into noise. Visionary, they called me. Fearless. Reformed. The kind of words people use when they don't know what else to say. I smiled through it all, signing papers, shaking hands, posing for photos. It was only when I slipped into the quiet hallway behind the auditorium that I finally exhaled. Marcus appeared moments later, holding 2 glasses of champagne. That he said was genius. The trust, the tone, the control. You gave them the redemption story they wanted and the leadership they didn't expect. I took the glass from him. "I didn't do it for them," I said. "I did it for him." He studied me carefully. "You've changed." I shook my head. "I've grown. There's a difference." He raised his glass. "To grow, then." I clinked mine against his. "To peace." That evening, the city was golden with sunset. I sat in my office, the skyline bleeding pink and amber through the windows. On my desk sat a single envelope forwarded from the rehab facility in California. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Leon. For a long time, I just looked at it, tracing the letters with my thumb. Then I opened it. Amara, it began. I watched the shareholders' meeting today. I saw what you did with the trust. I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm grateful for it. You were right, I was afraid. Afraid of you, of Grandma, of never being enough. I thought control would make me powerful, but power without respect is hollow. I'm getting better now, learning what real work looks like. Maybe someday I'll build something of my own, not from inheritance, but from effort. Tell Mom I'm sorry. Tell yourself the same thing. If you ever need to, I'll be here. I read it twice, then again until the words blurred. For years I'd imagined this moment an apology, a reckoning. But not like this. Not handwritten. Not human. The letter didn't heal me, but it softened something inside me that had been locked in iron for too long. It wasn't closed. It was released. Marcus knocked gently before entering. Press is waiting at the after party, he said. You're the guest of honor. I smiled faintly. Let them celebrate. I have work to do. He lingered, watching me. You've already done it. Not yet, I said quietly. But I'm close. When he left, I turned back to the window. The city glittered below, alive, relentless, beautiful. Somewhere in that maze of lights, my brother was starting over. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to compete. I'd won everything I set out to claim. Cher's legacy, respect. But none of it compared to what I'd finally reclaimed. My peace. I folded Leon's letter carefully and slipped it into the drawer beside Grandma's last note. 2 generations of Monroe blood, 2 paths through fire, both ending in survival. Outside, the first stars flickered faintly against the deepening sky. For once, I didn't feel like the woman who conquered an empire. I just felt like myself, steady, certain, finally unburdened. I whispered into the quiet room, almost to her, almost to myself. They never saw me coming, Grandma. But they'll remember me now. And for the first time in a very long while, I believed it. A year had passed since the night of my brother's disastrous wedding, the night that marked both his downfall and my rebirth. Now I stood beneath the same vaulted ceilings of St. Augustine Hall, but this time I wasn't a guest. I was the host. The ballroom had been transformed into a vision of glass and gold for the Monroe Global Charity Gala. Cameras lined the red carpet. Reporters whispered my name as flashes lit up the marble entrance. It was strange walking into the same space where my humiliation had once echoed like applause. Tonight, the echo was mine. I stepped out of the car in a black gown threaded with silver, subtle, deliberate. Grandma used to call black quiet armor, and under the crystal lights it felt exactly that. Inside, Marcus met me near the entrance, perfectly composed as always. Ready to close the circle, he asked. I smiled faintly. It was never a circle, Marcus. It was a climb. The crowd turned as I entered. The same faces that once laughed at me for being plain, practical, forgettable, now whispered another word, billionaire. At the far end of the room, I spotted Sienna. She looked older, softer, no longer the glossy woman from the magazines. She crossed the floor toward me, her heels barely whispering against the marble. You look beautiful, she said quietly. So do you, I replied. How's Leon? Her smile trembled. Better. He's teaching art therapy at the recovery center. Says it's the first thing he's done in years that feels real. I nodded. That sounds like him, the real him. She hesitated, then reached out, touching my arm lightly. I think your grandmother would be proud of you. I hope so, I said. She always believed in the long game. A waiter passed with champagne. I took a glass, turned toward the stage, and caught Marcus's subtle signal from across the room. It was time. The lights dimmed. A hush spread through the hall as I walked to the podium. The same hall where Leon had once mocked me. The same marble beneath my feet. The same chandeliers. But everything else had changed. I faced the audience, my voice calm, steady, measured. A year ago I began. I sat in this very hall and listened to someone tell a room full of people that I was cheap, that I'd never be enough. And for a while, I believed him. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked softly like restrained applause. But here's what I've learned since I continued. Being underestimated isn't an insult, it's an advantage. Power doesn't come from money, it comes from patience. From knowing when to stay silent, when to strike, and when to forgive. I paused, scanning the room. The silence wasn't tense, it was reverent. Tonight's gala isn't about success, I said. It's about restoration. Every dollar we raise will go to the Monroe Foundation to help women who were told they were too plain, too old, too small to matter. We're done apologizing for being underestimated. The applause began slowly, then grew into something real, something alive. For the first time, it didn't sound like noise, it sounded like recognition. When the speeches ended, the band started playing a low jazz melody and conversations filled the air again. I slipped onto the balcony for a moment of quiet. The city shimmered below, endless and forgiving. Marcus joined me, handing over a small glass of wine. You know, he said, the woman who built this empire looks exactly like the one who sat at that wedding table pretending she didn't care. I laughed softly. That woman cared too much about what others saw. This one finally learned to see herself. He lifted his glass toward me. To Vivian Monroe. I raised mine. And to the lessons learned the hard way. We clinked glasses, and for a while neither of us spoke. The hum of the city below blended with the music behind us, life moving on. Later that night, back in my penthouse, the stillness felt different, not lonely earned. I walked past the full-length mirror in the hallway, the one Grandma had given me before she died. Its frame was carved with her favorite quote etched in gold. They never see us coming. I stopped studying my reflection. The black gown, the steady eyes, the faint smile of someone who had finally stopped fighting ghosts. The girl who once sewed thrift store fabric into dresses was gone. The woman who replaced her wasn't flawless or vengeful. She was free. The clock on the mantel struck midnight. Outside, snow began to fall again. The air was cold but clean, and the tiny flakes caught the glow of the distant city lights. I opened the balcony doors and stepped out. From here, the skyline stretched endlessly. Glass towers like silent witnesses to everything I'd built, everything I'd lost, everything I'd become. I looked up, letting the snow touch my skin. It's done, Grandma, I whispered. The empire's whole again. Your name, your work, it's safe. The wind shifted, carrying a sound so soft it could have been memory or laughter. I smiled. They never saw me coming. But now they'd never forget. Behind me, the city pulsed with light and promise, and somewhere across the country, my brother was rebuilding his life piece by piece. Maybe redemption wasn't something you reached. Maybe it was something you built together from the wreckage. I turned back toward the skyline one last time, my voice steady, certain. The war's over, I said softly. Now it's time to live. And under the falling snow, with the city glowing beneath me, I finally did.